A very good evening, everyone. So here we are once again with the same workshop. So today, what are we looking into? So yesterday we looked into RC airplanes. Today it's all about drones. But what are we looking into drones today on? So we'll be looking into the basic concepts of drones, and we missed a little bit of content yesterday, but don't worry, it'll be all covered today. So today we'll be interestingly talking into the legal issues. We'll be talking into how to license a drone and all the legal issues faced with that. Also, alongside with some career opportunities. So as usual, we have a few announcements to give to you all so that the session takes place on a smooth way. So first of all, I would start again with an apology because yesterday I mentioned that we will be able to accommodate 1,000 participants through Zoom itself, but unfortunately we could not because of some technical issues and instability. But it's okay, we can still, you all can still join us through Facebook Live and YouTube Live. You can venture to our IEEE student branch of SLTC page and SLTC SEDS page where this session is going on live, and on IEEE YouTube page as well, again through the live session. Also about the certification, so participants would be awarded a certificate, as I mentioned on our last session as well, under 3 criteria exactly. So the participants should be throughout the session here connected with us, and another attendance form for today would be as well shared. You have to fill that. Also, the participants should have registered to this webinar beforehand. So again, without further delay, why don't we go into the session? So we have our very special guest who was with us yesterday as well, Mr. Samira Vikramarachi. Sir, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Hassan. How are you all doing? I hope you had a good weekend. I mean, this is not over yet.
Yes,
but
sir.
I hope that everybody sort of got some information with the session that we did yesterday.
Obviously, sir.
Let's see what we can do today as well then.
I'm sure now all our participants would be really intrigued with your setup behind you, sir.
Right. Do you want me to sort of, tell you a brief introduction onto this? Well, basically, this is a Airbus A320 simulator. I mentioned something to do with 3D printing yesterday. I wanted to show you because all of these things which you can see behind you, obviously without the screens, are all sort of manufactured here, like in my house, 3D printed, laser cut and things like that. So these are some sort of things that you can do at home and maybe sort of earn some money out of it as well at the end of the day. So this system actually works as if a real A320 simulator. Everything works, all the buttons and switches. So yeah, so anybody who's interested in it can sort of contact me and then get more information, and maybe if the COVID situation is died down, we can sort of have a go on it.
Very well indeed, sir. Obviously, I guess people would be contacting you on that. So then before handing over the session to Mr. Samira here, just one more small thing about our question and answer session. We will have a question and answer session throughout Mr. Samira's lecture here, all the presentation that he has. Also, after the presentation, we have a separate question and answer session as well. So if you think that the presentation needs to be like, flow, note down your questions and we can straight away go to the question and answer session where in detail we all can discuss, and your questions can be posted on a website and the link would be shared. I guess it's already shared. Yes, the link is already shared, and it would be much appreciated if you can post your questions through the website. By doing that, it will ensure the flow and the smoothness of our session here today. So sir, the session is in your hands.
Thank you very much. So let's start on sharing my screen. Right. So yesterday we did something on the line of RC aircrafts, but today we're going to be a bit more advanced and what are the things that we can do rather than having a hobby on RC. Why don't we like sort of get into earning some money out of it? So this is where all the drones comes into play. So drones have evolved quite a lot since last few years, I believe. And even the regulations have changed quite a lot for the last few years. it's not, let me say, it's not sort of a free airspace that you can use right now for drones, especially the ones we are using right now in Sri Lanka. However, I'll give you more information onto that later on with what we're going to learn today. So we'll be talking about types of drones today, and also the applications, what we can do with a particular drone, and what we are capable of doing on a particular drone. And also, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about drone certification and pilot certifications as well. So as I mentioned before, I'm a certified drone pilot. So civil aviation actually got only 19 drone pilots certified in Sri Lanka. This was done during the first wave of the COVID situation, so that we can help the Sri Lankan government to sort of gain more information on the environment and the surroundings and so on and so forth. I'll tell you more about it later on. And also we'll be talking about potential carry opportunities. So let's say we buy a drone, and then if we're not gonna make money out of it, then we are spending quite a lot of money just for a normal hobby. But if we can make something out of it and then make a career out of it, then that's a good thing, right? And also, in the last session of our session, we'll be talking about how to build your own drone. So I'll be talking about, as I mentioned on our previous workshops, what are the things that we need to build a drone, and how we can get the parts in, and then how we can fly it, how we can certify it even with civil aviation. So let's move on. So, okay, now we've seen quite a lot of variety of drones, but most common drones that we see in Sri Lanka are basically quadcopters and multicopters. So multicopters in the sense it has rotors. So maybe 3 rotors, minimum of 3 rotors, up to maybe it can go up to about 12 as well. So, but there are other drones as well, fixed wing drones and VTOL drones. VTOL in the sense vertical takeoff and landing drones, which is sort of a trend these days that they are developing on as well, not just multicopters, because there are certain things that a multicopter can do and certain things that fixed wing aircraft can do than a multicopter. So moving on. So what is a drone? So you might have heard of UAVs and USS, but now in Sri Lanka, when you're talking about a drone, we don't necessarily talk about these kind of aircrafts, but we just straight away go to either photographical drones or videographical drones. But it's actually more to that. So even our Air Force has some drones which were used back in the day as well, and still they have it, and they're still developing on the drones as well. So basically what they do is they use it for variety of reasons, so such as surveillance, maybe even dropping medical supplies and things like that, which is not done at the moment in Sri Lanka, but in other countries they do that as well. So I mentioned that, okay, how does a RC aircraft and a drone differentiate? Now, I told you that when you put on some extra additional things to a normal RC aircraft, that becomes a drone. I told you that in our last session. So what I meant was that if that particular unit you are installing on your aircraft is capable of data capturing, so for example, a camera, a barometer, or speed indicator, or anything to do with data, that means that aircraft becomes a drone. So basically you can relay that information to the ground station. That means you get the information there and then your normal RC aircraft becomes a drone. And the reason why I told you not to install such things without getting permission from civil aviation and such and all is, normally you're not allowed to fly a drone unless you're certified to fly that particular drone and you have the permission to fly that drone in that particular area or in that particular time. So I'll get into more details onto that later on. Let's move on. So what are the common uses of drones? So the most common use that we see in Sri Lanka are aerial photography. You've seen even today, you have seen like there are lots of floods going on around the country. So there were drones which has taken some evidence of what is going on, and also where the shippers basically had a fire issue, and there were some drones which got that information as well for us, and so on and so forth. And also there are shipping and delivery, which we don't actually do. But in other countries like Amazon and things like that has successfully done these kind of things. They basically have the capability to deliver products to you. For example, let's say that if I want to buy something, especially like these days, where the whole country is under lockdown, I would basically go online and order something that will be delivered, not by a mail, but by a drone. And it can be it will land at whatever the designated place that you have, and then it will deliver the package, and it will just fly back to its original base of origin. And moving on, geographic mapping. So as I mentioned, so I'll be talking more on to the things that we can do in Sri Lanka as well. So geographic mapping is one more thing that we need to consider, because not a lot of people does it at the moment. But I'll tell you more onto that later on. And disaster management, especially these days, we need to consider these kind of things to use drones, because especially we can predict landslides and things like that as well with these kind of drones. And precision agriculture, search and rescue, weather forecast, those kind of things. Weather forecast, obviously, when you say a drone, normally it's sort of like a balloon, which you send up there, and then it will relay the information down to your base station. And search and rescue, the word it says itself, it says, okay, if somebody is missing, you can send a drone and search for that person. And precision agriculture is basically seeding of all these cultivational fields and things like that. And wildfire monitoring, law enforcement, and entertainment purposes. So those kind of things as well, I'll be talking a bit more in depth in the next few slides. Right, let's move on. So as I mentioned, a lot of people have seen these aerial photographical drones in Sri Lanka. Now, most of the common manufacturer is a DJI, but I've seen a lot of people have sort of went on and created their own drone for themselves, and then fly it and with the camera installed on it, but not knowing the real regulations behind it. Because as I mentioned, if you have a camera on it, you need to have special permission to fly the particular drone, and I'll tell you more about it later on. So these drones will range, the prices will range quite rapidly. These are not cheap as per se, but as I said, the technology has been involved quite a lot, that these drones can even shoot in 4K video, and have very high capacity cameras installed onto them. So these are very, very expensive. However, you can basically okay, I'm getting that. You can basically have an income out of this. If you have a drone like that, you may be able to get yourself registered, and then be a camera person for either a TV corporation or a news corporation, or maybe do it for yourself, and then do some photography and videography work with that. However, there are no restrictions on doing that as long as you are registered with civil aviation and that you have the permission to fly wherever you're flying at that particular time. Moving on, as I mentioned about drones for cargo and medical delivery, even in Sri Lanka, there was a company which actually went on and searched what are the possibilities that we can do it here, because especially in rural areas in Sri Lanka, there is a very need of medical supplies to hospitals and such like that. So if we have a system where we can deliver some, let's say, maybe blood or maybe vaccinations and things like that through air, which is going to be very effective as well. But the thing is, now transporting these kind of things through air, it will be very costly. So even when you have a ground vehicle to transport it, it will take more time. So having a drone to deliver these things is very cost effective. Only thing is we have not established sort of a solid ground as per yet in Sri Lanka, but there are other countries which does these things, especially a company called Zipline has already done it in Africa and other regions. So they'll be able to basically send the drone, then drop the medical equipment, and then return back to base with very less amount of money than if you were to send it through air with a normal either helicopter or normal aircraft. Right. Let's move on. So I was talking about drones for mapping as well. Now, when it comes to mapping, you can, let's say you have a normal drone which you can do some photography. So this same particular drone can be used for mapping. However, if you want to have a more accurate mapping system, then obviously you need real-time kinematic positioning mapping system installed on your drone. That is an RTK drone. So if you have that, then the accuracy of the images that you take will be very high. For example, if you have a normal drone that, let's say in this picture, you have a Phantom 4 RTK version, but if you have a normal version Phantom 4, and if you were to send it to get some pictures of the mapping area, you might be having an error. You know, there is a plus or minus error with the distance. So normally the error will be around, let's say for an example, 5 centimeters. But if you have a RTK positioning system, the error will be less than 2 or 3 millimeters. So that's how accurate the systems will be if you have an RTK system. And I have a small video for you guys. So this is a mapping that we done at Hambantota. This is actually near the Hambantota harbor. As you can see, this is a 3D image which was generated by the drone itself. The plus point is that this area is around, what you see is around 90 acres. So if this kind of things to be done in a normal conventional way, now as you can see, even you can see the contours of the land as well, like, you know, where the highs and lows and things like that. So this only took about less than an hour to get all the mapping done. Only issue was that the drone has a limited amount of battery. So for example, that drone could only fly up to about 15 minutes at a time. So because of that, the time duration increased. But if you think about the actual flying time, get it into a system where we can process, it only took around 1 to 2 hours maximum to get all this information, right? So what we normally do is, as I mentioned, so if you were to go into drone mapping, it's not just the drone that you needed. There is another software that you would need to basically stretch all these images together and then compile it together and then process the images, and then that will give you an outcome of something like this. So normally that will, at the moment, Sri Lanka does not have any software as such, but we'll have to go to a third party to basically we'll have to pay for them to process these images and get it for us. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned, this is a good career opportunity as well if you are thinking about getting into drones, because just like photography, there are lands all over this country which needs to be mapped and surveyed and things like that. So when I talk about surveying, let's say you have a land of 100 acres, you can easily send this drone and basically do a comprehensive survey of this particular land, and then come back and then give the information to the client and tell them, okay, this is the land, this is the contours of the land and things like that. Let's say if that particular client is sort of building some buildings or anything like that in that particular land, you can even do a quantity survey on that land. For example, you can even say how much of land has been dug out from the land itself, how much of soil has been dug out, and how much of, let's say, gravel has been taken into, or things like that. You can even give a survey onto that. However, you'll need to do like let's say if you do a survey today and then you just wait for about another week's time and then do another survey, and then you can compare the differences and you can even tell the client, okay, this has changed like this and all that. And this mapping is also a good thing when it comes to detecting landslide as well. It's the same technology, but a bit more advanced. So basically by mapping sort of like hill area or things like that, we'll be able to tell, okay, this area is prone to landslides and this is okay, and this is in a dangerous zone. So likewise, there was an initiative with the Sri Lankan government that we have to do it, but I don't know, because of the COVID situation and all that, we couldn't do it. However, we are planning to do it in the future. So map the whole of the Sri Lanka by drones, and then give a comprehensive report of saying, okay, these are the areas which needs concentrating on, whether to get the people evacuated and things like that. For example, now we had a landslide recently yesterday, I believe, and we lost 4 people because of that, because I think they were even informed to vacate the premises, but they did not. So these kind of things can be done doing a land survey as well. But moving on. So drones for agriculture. So this is something that actually we do in Sri Lanka. Either we can send a normal drone to survey a land, for example, with a multispectrum camera. So multispectrum in the sense, basically the color range is much more wider than a normal camera on that particular camera. So it will detect all the anomalies of the, let's say, plant or maybe on the soil. So we can tell whether this soil needs more water, whether this soil needs more nutrition, or whether this soil needs to be dried out. So things like that we can give. Like on this picture, it says a normal image as well as NDVI image. So you can see the difference, what we can give to our customer, and what we normally does is, and then we send another drone which is able to spray fertilizer or water or whatever the things that you would need. However, this is sort of a bit more expensive subject. But if you are into drones, if you are more than capable of handling a drone, if you can prove yourself that you can fly a drone, then there are more than, at least 3 or 4 companies in Sri Lanka who are willing to take you on as a drone pilot, and they will train you with the equipment, and then they will give you basically a job to do these things. So last few years, I think nobody sort of thought of spraying fertilizers with the drone, but now the technology is there, so they are doing it right now. And this is another opportunity for you guys who are into drones to make a career out of it, and do some research onto this, because this is sort of an upcoming trend, as I mentioned, like mapping. This is upcoming trend where fertilizer is being sprayed through drones, and there are some people even in Sri Lanka who has manufactured these kind of drones, and then they have tested it as well. However, there are some legal as well as some issues with certifying these kind of products, because at the end of the day, this is sort of a unit that can do some damage, and because of the weight and all that of this particular drone, this becomes sort of like this categorized into a real aircraft. So because of that, then you need to have some regulations onto those. I'll get to that as well later on. Hussein, do you have any questions?
No, so we'll go on further.
Right, drones for inspections. Now, for example, there is a project going on at, I think, up north, where we have a lot of wind turbines. Now they are actually using drones to inspect the wind turbines, and you can basically give a report on whether the wind turbines are okay, like visually, and even power lines can be inspected. So this is some other thing that a drone is capable of doing. But at the end of the day, if you're thinking about buying a drone, then for these kind of purposes, you need to know whether that particular drone is equipped enough to do these kind of things. Or else, if you are thinking about building a drone like this, then you need to think about the especially the camera, which is going to be the main part here, which is used for inspection, to check whether that is capable of doing these kind of things as well. So I have another video of what we've done. So this particular drone is called Matrix 300. So what we're doing here right now is basically inspecting this power line, this power cables and things like that. So you can see how much we can do the zooming onto this particular power line and all that. And also you have an infrared image as well. You can see whether if that particular thing is heated up or anything like that. So as you can see now, you can even clearly see the bolt of this particular power line after zooming in. So this kind of technology is available right now in Sri Lanka, and that you can even get into that and then make a career out of that. And also, so I've talked about drones for disaster management and surveillance, like for example, like landslides and things like that we can do, but also we can use drones to do some surveillance as well, especially these days, whether people are wearing the mask or anything like that. I'll give you another example of a thing that we've done. So this particular drone is basically flying around 200 to 300 meters away from that particular object. So that person cannot hear the drone, he cannot see the drone. However, you see what sort of a video that we have. Sorry, this is actually to do the surveillance before. We can even get the infrared images out of this. Let's say this is a sort of a residential area. We can see where are the heat sources coming from and what are the cool spots and things like that. So even if there's a fire which is about to build up, or maybe there's some floods going on, we can detect with this particular camera and then do the necessary things for us. So you've seen that there's a pressure going on as well. Right, let's move on to this video. So this is the one I told you about. So these people are sort of hanging around. So this drone is zooming into this. So you'll see that in a minute that you can even read what is written on that particular person's mask. So that's how much you can zoom into. And these are very, very advanced drones. However, the technology is here. We can use it for these kind of surveillance purposes as well. So if you can read what is on that person's mask, then that means you can do a lot of things, even with the normal, I mean, when the people are, like, let's say they're not behaving properly. Let me move on to CSL rules and regulations. However, let me emphasize first of all that what civil aviation actually does, because civil aviation is basically the governing body who actually controls the skies of our airspace. So there was an incident that this particular person has sort of flown a drone. He actually has lost it. And then at the end of the day, they have to go to the police and say, look, I've lost the drone and things like that. At the end of the day, we found out that this particular person has not gained permission from the Civil Aviation Authority. So he was saying that the police have asked him to fly it. That's okay, that the police has given permission. But this is not the case. So, for example, when an aircraft flies from our airspace, they would not inform police. They would basically inform the Civil Aviation Authority of Sri Lanka, stating that basically we are flying over. Likewise, if you have a drone, it categorized as an aircraft, and that you have to get the permission from Civil Aviation to fly it. Not just to register, but even to fly it. So, for example, they have categorized these drones into 4 sections according to their weight. So, as I said, so 25 kilos or above is categorized as a category A aircraft. The information are the more information are on civil aviation website that you can basically go on and look into. So 25 kilograms is quite a lot of weight when you're considering a drone. So as I mentioned before as well, those drones which we take on these surveillance and all these things comes right below the 25 kilogram range. However, if you are thinking about fertilizing and things like that, obviously the capacity has to be higher. So that particular aircraft will might come under that 25 kilogram or maybe over. So if it goes over, that means that particular aircraft has to be treated as a real aircraft, which means it has to go through maintenance. It has to go through inspections. It has to satisfy all the airworthiness tests, which the civil aviation does. So a lot of things we have to consider. Now, if it is above 1 kilo and 25 kilos, which most of the drones go into, that means it's going to be category B. So that is the restrictions are a bit less. However, still you need to inform civil aviation authority whether you're flying, where you're flying, and on top of that, you need to inform the Ministry of Defense that you're flying as well. And the other thing is, let's say if you're flying near an archaeological department area, like for archaeological an area. So if in that case, you'll have to ask them as well for their permission. So even civil aviation says yes, even Ministry of Defense says yes. If these guys say no, then you are not allowed to fly. And above 20 grams, but at or below 1 kilograms is category under C. However, the restrictions are, as I mentioned, is below the category B level, but the same things apply when you're flying the drone. Only category which actually does not have much restrictions are for drones which is under 200 grams or below. That for those kind of drones, you don't need to get permission. However, if you have a data acquisition system, for example, a camera, then you will have to have permission to fly, even if that particular drone is less than 200 grams in weight. Moving on, so these are the civil aviation rules and regulations. So CASL stands for Civil Aviation Authority of Sri Lanka. So they're saying basically you're not allowed to fly along or over railways. So you're not, even though there are nobody around that area and you think, okay, you might be able to get a good picture or maybe a good movie done with this drone footage and things like that, you're not allowed to fly along the railways or else over a railway. And the other thing is over assembly of persons or public gatherings. Like, for example, if there is a meeting going on outside, you're basically not allowed to fly over them. You can fly below or after these people, but you're not allowed to fly over them because at the end of the day, these drones, these are basically machines. So anything can happen, or even though there are safety features inbuilt onto these drones, you might be able to have let's say a bird strike. A bird might come and hit the drone and then you can't do anything about it, but just to watch it falling out from the sky. So if somebody was below that, then that person might get injured, even die. These kind of things, they take it very seriously. So if people are gathered and you're not allowed to fly on top of them. Not go within 5 miles of one boundary of any airport. So this, I think you all know about. You're not allowed to fly near an airport. So within a 5-mile radius. However, even if you try to fly, for example, a DJI drone, that drone will not be activated. So that particular drone nowadays already knows where that location is, and that drone knows that this aircraft is near to an airport, and that unless it is unlocked within the manufacturer itself, you cannot fly that particular drone inside an airport because you're not allowed to arm the aircraft. Arming in the sense, there is a sequence of things that you need to do on your controller. That is how you activate the drone to fly. I'll tell you more about it when you're talking about the transmitter of a drone and things like that. And the other thing I need to mention is that if there was any requirement to fly within the airport itself, but even DJI would not allow you to fly on top of a active runway, or maybe if the particular runway was closed, then you're able to do so. You need to inform DJI prior, and you need to send them a request stating that I need to fly at this particular area at this particular time, and you need to send them support evidence such as the authorization letters from Civil Aviation and Airport Authority and things like that. So once they send it to them, they will unlock it from their servers so that you will be able to fly the drone, but not on top of the runway, but within the apron area and things like that. Also, proximity to communication towers. So communication towers, you're not allowed to fly near to. And as I showed you on the video as well, we were flying a bit away from the tower. However, we were able to zoom in onto the communication tower, and then even the towers, the electrical towers, you're not allowed to fly near to. And over national parks, as I mentioned, archaeological sites, protected areas, all sources of security establishments. So no fly zones are like, for example, you're not allowed to fly over Air Force Base or Army Base or police base, anything like that. Archaeological sites, as I mentioned, and national parks as well. And below or above electricity power lines, which is a no-no as well. And sometimes you might get magnetic interferences, which might get your drone down as well if you're flying very near to a very powerful power line. And civilization has regularity has said, no, you're not allowed to fly near those things. And over congested areas, this actually goes to the same point that I mentioned in the second paragraph there. And along or over roadways. So you're not supposed to fly on or along the roadways or over the roadways as well. For example, some people might try to fly where there's not much traffic and all that. They will try to maybe follow a car. So you're not basically allowed to do that, because if in any case, if the particular aircraft falls out of the sky, as I mentioned, things can happen. And if that's the case, then you're going to do a lot of damage and harm to other people and your drone as well. Right. Do we have any questions so far?
Yes, sir. There's one question.
Yeah.
So can you please suggest some budget-friendly GPS receivers in Sri Lanka to do RTK?
Okay, now RTK are not budget friendly at the moment. However, if you were to do some drone mappings and things like that, as I mentioned, I would suggest go with a NASA V2 version with the GPS receiver on it, because those are the best, I believe, best drone products at the moment. There are other products as well, such as Pixhawk and open source other things as well, which I'll come to that later on. However, at the moment, if you were to do something like that, I would suggest you go with NASA V2. That is the basic, cheapest right now where you can buy. Hassan?
Yes, sir. There's one more question. CAA mentioned current rules and regulations is about to change in near future last year. When can we get the updated version?
So I mentioned that there were like 4 categories. Now it has been updated. So if you remember that those categories, the weight categories were different before than today's weight categories. So they have changed it a bit. And they're also looking into, I told you that they're also looking into RC model aircraft flying as well. So they don't want to get these two tangled in together. So they are basically working on it these days, and they will be implementing newer rules soon, I believe, and hope so. But however, now if we have suggested that, okay, without we having to sort of ask for permission all the time, but at the end of the day, we cannot basically change it because of the situation that our country is right now. Unless we have an establishment, or maybe like, for example, now we have 19 people in our group, which is called Certified Drone Pilots Association. So these people, even for us, we have to have the permission to fly, unless either Air Force or maybe civil aviation asks us to go and fly somewhere, unless if we are doing something for our own ourselves, or maybe even for other people, we'll have to get the permission. So these kind of things, I'm not sure whether they're going to change it. However, they are looking into some leniency towards the drone pilots and RC aircraft pilots as well.
We can continue with the session right now.
Right. So these are the restricted areas of drone operations in Sri Lanka. So as you can see on the picture on your left, this is the areas such as you can see Bandaranaike International Airport. The whole area is basically blocked off, and you have Ratmalana Airport as well, and as well as Mattala. And there are other areas which we are not supposed to fly. And then there is another map on the right hand side where it states all the archaeological areas which you are not allowed to fly unless you take permission. So this information is available on Civil Aviation website and Archaeological Department website as well. So if you have any doubts, please go onto those sites and then have a look and then see whether you are able to fly near that particular area. However, like for example, if you live near Bandaranaike International Airport, you'll be having some issues trying to fly your drone, because you'll have to come out of that area in order to fly your drone. So those kind of things you'll have to consider unless you're thinking about flying outside that particular boundary area. Okay, so moving on, as I mentioned, that category D is sort of free from approvals, but there are some constraints that you need to think of. Like for example, you cannot fly over 150 feet from the ground level. Normally even 150 is quite a lot. So normal drones that you're talking about, if it is less than 200 grams, you won't be able to even see that particular drone if you fly over 150 feet. So I would suggest that you keep it at a low level. And drone with weight less than 200 grams, I told you that before. And drone without a camera, and for leisure and educational purposes at public places which are clearly identified for the purpose, which is like, for example, a ground which has given permission, which the authorities has given permission to fly a drone. But however, these are drones which goes under 200 grams and without a camera. Okay, so and the other thing is at a private premises with the consent of the owner. So if the owner says okay, you can fly it at your private premises, but provided that all these things has to be satisfied in order to fly without having the permission. So registering your drone and yourself. So previously there was basically a process where you'll have to get this form filled up and then present yourself to the Civil Aviation Authority, and then you'll have to show that you are fit enough to fly. For example, they will do an eye test, and then they will do a basic sort of a medical test, and then they will get yourself registered at Civil Aviation as a drone pilot. And then you'll have to register your drones individually. So for example, if you have one or more drones with you, then you'll have to register them individually. The form is called CA/AU/015. That's the most updated version I've found today. So if the drone weight is less than 200, or which does not fit with any data capturing or data retrieval tools such as camera, then you don't need to register, as I mentioned. And the thing is that now, because of the COVID situation, you are not allowed to go out and all that. If you have a drone that needs to be registered, you can do so by basically filling this up and then send it to their email address, which is provided at the form. And they will do the registration for you, because at the end of the day, you'll need to, what they will do is basically register the drone as if you have it with you. It's not necessarily going to register you as a drone pilot, but they will say, okay, this drone is registered to you. And then they will send you a registration confirmation with the reference number that you can have it with you. Or normally what they used to do is basically, as you can see here, they have a barcode and the civil aviation sticker. They put it on, and then they will get the registration done for you at their premises. They will ask you to fly it as well sometimes, to show that you are confident enough to fly the drone, and then get yourself registered. And for those who are thinking about building their drones, I need to mention this as well. So for example, let's say you gather all the parts and then start building. There's another section that you need to go into civil aviation site and then basically get your drone registered. So they will, because the thing is that on the normal registration form, they will ask for serial numbers of the drone and the radio that you're using and all that. And similarly, on the other hand, you might not be able to give those details because you're basically buying parts from different entities. So because of that, you might not be able to give. Otherwise, they will ask you for the flight controller number. I will get into flight controls a bit more later on. So from the registration point of view, they just needed those information, and then you can get yourself registered. If you even build a drone, which is like more than 200 grams and with the camera and all these things. So getting registered is the first part. So once you get registered, you will have the reference number. But let's say you need to fly. So if you're doing it for leisure purposes, and even if you're doing it for as a sort of a hobby, or even for your work, you'll need to get permission from the Civil Aviation Authority of Sri Lanka, plus OCDS, which is also the MOD, before you fly. So at least two working days prior, you need to do this. First of all, you need to send a letter to OCDS stating that we're going to fly in this particular area. This is the aircraft we're going to fly. This is the registration details. This is the pilot details. We seek permission from you to fly. So once they will evaluate that, and then they will get back to you saying, okay, you have the permission, then only you can go through the civil aviation form and then ask civil aviation to give you the permission. I've seen somebody raising their hand. I can answer if they have a question. San?
Yes, sir, there's a question in Sinhala.
Yeah.
Sir, අපි drone යවනකොට permission ගන්න ඕනේ CAA එකනුයි OCDS එකනුයි හැම සැරේම. එහෙම නැතුව CAA එකයි හරි OCDS එකේ society එකට වගේ එකට බැදිලා අපිට සල්ලි ගෙවන්න නැතුව ලංකාවේ ඕන තැනක drone එක fly කරන්න පුළුවන් යම් කිසි විදිහක් තියෙනවාද?
දැනට එහෙම නැහැ සන්. මොකද ඉෂුව එක තියෙන්නේ මේ හැම දෙයක්ම සිවිල් ඒවියේෂන් එකේ යටතේ කන්ට්‍රෝල් වෙන්නත් බෑ. මොකද සමහර වෙලාවට දැන් හිතන්න කවුරු හරි පර්මිෂන් ඉල්ලනවා කොළඹ වල ෆ්ලයි කරන්න කියලා. කොළඹ වල ගොඩක් වෙලාවට සිකියුරිටි ත්‍රෙට්ස් තියෙන ඒරියා එකක් තියෙනවා. ඉතින් එහෙම වුණාම සිවිල් ඒවියේෂන් එකට ඒ රිස්ක් එක අරගෙන ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඒක දෙන්න බෑ. ඉතින් ඒගොල්ලන් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට මිනිස්ට්‍රි ඔෆ් ඩිෆෙන්ස් තමයි කන්ටැක්ට් කරන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒකින්ද තමයි අපි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට මුලින්ම මිනිස්ට්‍රි ඔෆ් ඩිෆෙන්ස් යන්නේ අපිට පර්මිෂන් ගන්න කියලා. මම දන්නවා දැන් මේ දවස්වල මම හිතන්නේ per day ඕගලන්ට ගෙවන්න ඕනේ around 3000 rupees to fly a drone. ඔයා දැන් ඔක ජොබ් එකක් විදිහට කරන්නේ නැත්නම් ඔයාගේ හොබි එකක් විදිහට කරනවා නම් ඔයා නිකන් රුපියල් 3000ක් වේදම් කරනවා කියලා තමයි හිතන්නේ මේක fly කරන්න. ඒක ඇත්ත. ඒක තමයි ඇත්තටම කතන්දරේ. නමුත් එහෙම කරන්නේ ඇත්තට මේ රටේ තියෙන තත්ත්වෙ හින්දා. මොකද සිවිල් ඒවියේෂන් එකෙන් ගොඩක් දේවල් කෝඩිනේට් වෙනවා අපි නොදැනුවත්ව. මොකද දැන් හිතන්න අපි ෆ්ලයි කරන පැත්තේ එයාක්‍රාෆ්ට් එකක් මේ යන්න තියෙනවා. මොකක් හරි කියන්නේ සිවිල් එයාක්‍රාෆ්ට් එකක් යන්න පුළුවන් කියලා හිතන්නකො. ඉතින් අපි ඒවලත් ඒකේ රිස්ක් එකත් අපි බලන්න ඕන. අපිට සමහරට ආමි එකේ හරි එයාෆෝස් එකේ හරි එයාක්‍රාෆ්ට් එකක් යන්න පුළුවන්. ඉතින් ඒ වගේ එයාක්‍රාෆ්ට් වලට තියෙන රිස්ක් එකකුත් තියෙනවා. ඉතින් හැම මේ හැමදේම කනෙක්ට් වෙලා තියෙන හින්දා තමයි දැන් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට අපි OCDS එකට ගිහිල්ලා ඊට පස්සේ OCDS එකෙන් පේමන්ට් මේ OCDS එකෙන් රික්වෙස්ට් එක අරගෙන සිවිල් ඒවියේෂන් යන්නේ. ඕක වෙනස් කරන්න ඇත්තටම මේ අපේ ලංකාවේ තියෙන තත්ත්වෙත් එක්ක හරි අමාරු දෙයක්. නමුත් දැන් පිට රටවල් බැලුවොත් එහෙම මම හිටියා British Aircraft Modelers Association කියලා. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ තියෙනවා membership එකක්. ඕගොල්ලන් අවුරුද්දකට පාරක් එක pay කරන්න ඕනේ. ඒගොල්ලන් membership card එකක් දෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ තියෙනවා insurance policy එකක්. ඒක insurance policy එක මේ membership එකත් එක්ක automatically හම්බ වෙනවා. ඉතින් ඔයා කොහේ හරි ගිහලා fly කරනවා නම් එතකොට එහෙ civil aviation එකට කීයක ඉන්න ඕනෙත් නෑ. Ministry of Defence කීයක ඉන්න ඕනෙත් නෑ. ඔයාට ඒ කාඩ් එක පෙන්නලා fly කරන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ අපි ගිහිල්ලා fly කරන තැන් designated තැන් විතරයි fly කරන්නේ. එන්නේ අපි fly කරන්නේ දැන් අපේ ලංකාව වෙලා තියෙන අපිට designated තැනක් නෑ හරියට fly කරන්න. ලංකාවේ ඇත්තටම තියෙන තැන් දෙකයි. Designated model aircraft flying තැන් දෙකයි තියෙන්නේ. එකක් තමයි මම හිතන්නේ කටුකුරුන්දේ. අනිත් එක තමයි අපේ මේ කඩවල තියෙන්නේ මේ fly කරන තැන. ඉතින් ඒ දෙක විතරයි දැනට aviation මේ civil aviation එකේ permission දීලා තියෙන්නේ model aircraft fly කරන්න. ඉතින් දැන් අපේ කට්ටිය වෙලා තියෙන්නේ අපේ එහෙම තැනක් නෙමෙයිනේ. අපි ගොඩක් වෙලා drone එකක් පාවිච්චි කරනවා වීඩියෝ කරන්න. වීඩියෝ කරන්න යද්දී අපි පිටින් එක වීඩියෝ කරලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒතර අපි යනවා කොළඹ වල හරි කොයි හරි තැනක නැත්නම් හොටෙල් එකක නැත්නම් බීච් එකේ. ඒ වගේ තැන්වල එක තැන්වලනේ අපි වීඩියෝ කරන්නේ. එතකොට එහෙම වුණාම ඒවා ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඒ කියන්නේ ට්‍රැක් කරන්න ඒගොල්ලන්ට ප්‍රොසෙස් කරන්න අමාරුයි. ඒකින්ද තමයි මේ වගේ ප්‍රොසීඩර් එකක් දීලා තියෙන්නේ. අපිට හරියට පර්මිෂන් අරගෙන ෆ්ලයි කරන්න කියලා. මොකද හදිස්සිය හරි අපි දැන් ෆ්ලයි කරන තැන මොකක් හරි ප්‍රශ්නයක් වුණොත් එහෙම අපිට එතකොට ඩොකියුමන්ට්ස් තියෙනවා. ඒගොල්ලොනුත් දන්නවා අපි මෙතන ෆ්ලයි කරනවා කියලා. එතකොට අපිට මොකක් හරි වුණොත් එහෙම කියන්න පුළුවන් මේ වෙලාවට අපි මේ වෙලාවට මේක ෆ්ලයි කරනවා කියලා. මම ඔයගලන්ට උදාහරණයක් කියන්නම්. අර මැපින් එක ඔයගලන් දැක්කන්නේ හම්බන්තොට. ඒක හම්බන්තොට හාබර් එකේ අපි කරේ. ඔතන ships එනවා යනවා හැමතිස්සෙම. ඒක එකක්. අනිත් එක තමයි එතන මිනිස්සු ගොඩක් එහාට මෙහාට යනවා. අනිත් එක දැන් ships වලින් unload කරනවා වාහන හැමතැනම වාහන තියෙනවා. ඔතන අපි කාටවත් කියන්නේ නැතුව ගිහිල්ලා අපි civil aviation එකට විතරක් කියලා අපි civil aviation එකේ කියනවා හරි මේක අපි මෙදාට fly කරනවා කියලා අපි ඒක permission ගත්ත කියන්නේ. එහෙම ගිහිල්ලා ගිහිල්ලා fly කරනවා. එතන ඉන්න මිනිස්සු දන්නේ නැහැ අපි මොනවද කරන්නේ කියලා. එතන ඉන්න නැව දන්නේ නැහැ අපි මෙතන fly කරනවා කියලා. ඉතින් ඒ දේවල් ඔක්කොම coordinate වෙනවා මේ අපි මේ කරන වැඩෙන් දැන්. එදා අපි එහෙම කරද්දි එතන Air Force officersලා දෙන්නෙක් හිටියා. එතකොට ඒ Air Force officer හැමතිස්සෙම කියන්නේ take off කරන වෙලාවට ලියා ගන්නවා, land කරන වෙලාව ලියා ගන්නවා. එතකොට ඒගොල්ලන් ගාව note එකක් තියෙනවා තනිකරම අපි මොනවද කරේ කියලා. එතන මොකක් හරි වුණත් එතන කවුරු කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා ඒක responsibility එක ගන්න. ඉතින් ඒ වගේ තමයි හැමදේම process එක ඒ විදිහට යන්න දාලා තියෙන්නේ. දැන් ඇත්තටම අර විදිහට කරන්න අමාරුයි. ඔයාට හැමදාම fly කරන්න එහෙම අවශ්‍යතාවයක් තියෙනවා නම් ලේසිම වැඩේ තමයි මේ වගේ club එකකට join වෙලා ඒ club එක හරහා ඔයගලන්ට fly කරන දවසට ඒතකොට permission තියෙනවා. ඒතකොට ඒ දවසට ඔයගලන්ට ගිහලා කිසි ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැතුව fly කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඔයගලන්ට වෙනම ගෙවන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. ඒක තමයි එකම option එක තියෙන. නැත්නම් ඉතින් හැමතැනම අපිට ගිහලා fly කරන්න පුළුවන් නේ. එම් කරන්න ගියොත් ලංකාවේ ඇත්තටම මේ security කියන එක ලොකු threat එකක් වෙන්න ඉඩ තියෙනවා. Say?
Yes, sir, we can move on.
Okay. So, as I was saying, you have to get permission from civil aviation, whatever happens, so that they know what you're doing and they know what are the altitudes that you're going to fly in and the area and the day and all that. And the other thing is, before you fly your drone, you need to inform, there will be some numbers that you need to call them. For example, I think that Air Force head office, you need to inform that you are flying at this particular area. And then once you're done with flying, you need to inform them as well. So normally if you're flying near a high risk area or high security area, they will ask you to have a army personnel or an Air Force personnel with you to check. And the other thing is nowadays civil aviation would require you to have a third party insurance before you fly. So third party insurance obviously you can gain from different insurance providers these days. If you basically talk to them, you might be able to get a good deal out of it. But as I mentioned, if you're not doing it for an income, this is another amount of money that you're spending for no reason. So you need to think about these things before you go on and buy a drone and then keeping it at home without having any opportunity to fly. So if you are flying a drone, then if you want to get into the hobby, then might as well join a club and then go through them. Or else think about a career opportunity that where you can progress yourself and then get into that. Right. So before I move on to building your own drone, any questions so far? I see somebody's raising their hand. I have a couple of people raising their hands. Say?
So I guess it would be better if you could finish these sections because there are questions on transmitters as well.
I see, okay. I mentioned the basic components of components that you need to build an RC aircraft. With yesterday's session, this components will be same because at the end of the day, you're basically using the same transmitter, same receiver as well. If you're building your own drone, and only thing which is going to change is the airframe and maybe the batteries and the optional extras. But however, I'll just go through these things one by one. But I'm not going to take a lot of time in these sections and just go through that, and then we'll see what we can learn out of this. So in the first place, you need to have an airframe as per the RC aircraft as well. So the airframe, in the sense, is the skeleton that you need. So if you build if you're building a multicopter, you need to see whether you're gonna go with a quadcopter or hexcopter or tricopter, whatever. And then obviously the power plants, because normally quadcopters, they don't use engines for good reason, because it's heavy and it's less efficient than the motors that we have right now. But the only downside is that the duration of the flight will be less than a normal RC aircraft. So I mentioned about VTOL aircrafts, which is vertical takeoff and land capable aircrafts. These are basically used for drone surveillance purposes as well, because they don't need, once they are in a particular altitude, they don't need power from their motors. They can basically use the wing, which is the lift is generated, and then stay in the air for a bit more longer time, because if in multicopters, obviously you need to have the motors running at all the times to keep the aircraft in the air. And we'll be talking about the electronics that we're going to need. This is also might not differ that much. However, the flight controllers might differ from RC aircrafts. And transmitter and receiver, as I mentioned, is going to be the same, but I'll show you some transmitters here and the differences between a normal RC transmitter and a drone transmitter. Drone, in the sense, as I mentioned, drones can be various configurations. But today we'll be talking about basically a multicopter. Obviously batteries, normally you need bigger batteries than a normal RC aircraft, and optional extras, as I mentioned, like before. So the airframe, as you can see in the picture, there are various airframes that you can choose from. The smallest is mostly for racing quads and things like that, which you can have a camera installed onto that as well. These are small, and those are basically made out of carbon fiber and plastics and things like that. And the second picture is the same, and the third one is a bit more bigger, but it's like built out of carbon fiber. So you can choose whatever the frame that you need. There are a lot of sellers online where you can buy these frames from. They are relatively inexpensive. However, if you need to think, if you're going big, that means you need bigger motors, good flight controllers, and things like that. So if you're gonna basically go in with a basic setup, then I would go and I would basically choose a setup which is mid-range, and then go from there. Right. So power plants, we'll talk about motors. So these particular motors are a bit different from RC motors because these are very, for example, now these motors needs to be very responsive because there are a lot of variations which is happening on the aircraft, and the autopilot systems on the aircraft, on the drone itself, will try to correct it all the time. So this needs to be very effective in responding to those corrections. So you need to have a good set of motors. I've seen a lot of people testing their build drones with cheap normal motors. I'm not saying don't go with cheap, but just go with a reliable motor. As I said, even when you're choosing a remote control, just go with a reliable remote control rather than going with the something cheap. Even with the cheap motor, there are tendency that it might work for the first few minutes and then it might burn out while you're flying. So the whole aircraft will be lost, because at the end of the day, even an RC aircraft, if you lost power, from your motor, then you can at least light the aircraft if you have enough sort of forward momentum. But when a drone loses a motor, then obviously if it is a quadcopter, then you don't have any control over it at all, but to basically crash it and then maybe damage all the other parts as well with it. So if you are thinking about building something like this, then might as well go with something reliable. Just talk to your friends who actually are in this hobby and then ask them what are the good motors available, because I'm sure there will be a lot of people who have done this before and who has the experience of building a drone. And so just talk to them, and if you have any queries, you can even contact me as well, and then get that information, because you don't want to have your drone that you build and spend quite a lot of time and money and just crash it and then destroy everything that you built. Right. So it actually comes with, it does not come with it, but you need to buy speed controllers as well. So every motor has to have an individual speed controller. On the right-hand side of that picture, which is in the corner, you have a speed controller which has 4 outputs. So there are some speed controllers like that as well. You can go with the configuration like that just to save weight. But there are some downsides as well. For example, if one of the sides has a fault or an issue, then you would have to replace the whole unit. Whereas if you buy individual speed controllers, then obviously you can only have to replace that particular unit which is damaged. Right. So when you talk about the electronics, as I mentioned, these are the flight controllers, and this is the NASA version that I've told when that particular person asked the question. So this is quite good flight control and quite stable. But there are cheaper versions as well. So which is on the left-hand side. That the issue with this is that you'll need to do a lot of tuning and experimenting with these things before you can get the aircraft in the air. Like for example, you need to have a bit of an understanding on how to tune that particular flight controller, whereas when it comes to NASA or a bit more better flight controllers, you don't need to tune it. All you need to do is just configure it to your specifications and it's ready to fly. Aerotech is also, I believe, is an open source software as well, where even you can have that on an aircraft, on a fixed wing aircraft. But however, NASA does not have the capability to put it onto a fixed wing aircraft. And Pixhawk as well, you can put it onto a fixed wing aircraft. Prices wise, I believe the cheapest is that KK3 board, which is on the left-hand side, and on the middle Pixhawk, I think it's around 15,000, and Aerotech is around 8,000, whereas NASA versions are a bit more expensive, around 20 to 30,000. However, it's worth getting it because you don't want to have issues afterwards. You don't need to, like, once it's installed, you don't need to think about doing any changes to it at all. And the N3 versions are pretty expensive, but you don't need to go into that level. But if you are an advanced user, I would suggest that you go with the best you can. Right, the transmitter and the receiver. Now, I've talked about these two things when we talk about the RC aircrafts. However, the fundamental difference between a drone remote and a RC aircraft remote somewhat are not different at all. It's the same thing. So, for example, I can use this my same Futaba remote to fly home-built drone as well. And I have another remote. This is a DJI remote from a Phantom 2 Pro. So as you can see, the sticks here basically comes in and goes into center, and then it stops there. So normally where you have to thrust, this is basically comes in and stops. That's the only difference. However, the functions are the same. The ailerons, elevators, rudder, and everything. All those 4 functions will be the same. And you have power button and then return to home button here. And then you have some extra buttons on this side to control the camera and the camera gimbals and things like that. Same thing can be applied, as I mentioned, like even this remote. You can have these switches and even these knobs connected to a camera or whatever that you're going to build to control these things. Sen, what are the other questions that you have on the remotes and the receiver?
Yes, on the transmitter, there's one question as we can use NRF24L01 wireless module to create transmitter and receiver for RC drone on an Arduino board, which is much more cheaper. But the question is it recommended or is it better to use?
I would not recommend doing something like that because you're basically compromising your whole aircraft just to test your receiver. So I would not recommend that because Arduino are very good. To be honest with you, this cockpit uses Arduino boards as well, but that is the maximum that I would go with, because when it comes to RC aircrafts and drones, I would suggest you not to go with some experimental things because you don't want to crash it. At the end of the day, you are basically taking a risk by putting something like that. I know it's going to be a bit more cheaper to get it done, but however, if you think about it now, you can get a FireSky transmitter and receiver for about 15,000 rupees. So maybe less than that, I'm not sure. But if you get something like that, that's the only thing that you're gonna need until you are confident enough with your particular aircraft and your drone. Because you build your drone and you build your transmitter as well, you don't know what's wrong with your drone and whether it's to do with your transmitter or whether it's to do with your drone, if something were to go wrong. So I would suggest you go with something that you know, and I always emphasize on this. Don't try to invent the wheel again, because wheel is already there. Get the wheel, use the wheel. Don't invent the wheel again. Just invent something new. Especially when it comes to like software sides, there are a lot of people who are more than capable. And I mentioned that there are some other third-party softwares that you need to use, especially when it comes to drone mapping and things like that. We can think of implementing here as well. Which you can gain a lot of money out of that. Even designing a drone, okay, let's say you go with an Arduino based transmitter and receiver. You're not sure about the range as well, because there are a lot of variables that can go wrong. So especially for something that is available and can be relatively cheap to get, why do we risk our product or whatever the aircraft that we build just to test that out? That's my opinion. Say?
Yes, sir. We can continue the session now.
So for the drones, obviously you will have much more advanced transmitters and receivers. But as I mentioned before, you can use the same thing if you have with you, but it has to be more than 4 channels. So for normal RC aircraft, you can do with either 3 channels or 4 channel transmitter. But for a drone, obviously you need to have more than 4 channels on your transmitter capable of handling, because there will be more options that you need to think of. For example, there are some autopilot systems that you might need to turn on and turn off, and maybe return to functions and things like that. So the transmitter, that's the only difference between a drone transmitter and a normal RC transmitter. And we'll talk about the batteries. Now, I've showed you guys the batteries that we normally use for RC aircrafts, which is around now, for example, this particular battery, which is on this picture, has 10,000 milliamps at 10C. So the discharge rate is very low. But for RC aircrafts, we are using around 30 to 45C discharge rate, but at around 1500, 2200 milliamp power. So that's one of the fundamental differences. And also these drone batteries, they are basically called an intelligent battery just because they know what's the, like for example, now I can press this button and see what's the capacity level like. And the other thing is it will give the details to the drone itself, and the drone will know how far you can fly and whether we need to come back. So for example, if this particular battery can last up to about 20 minutes, if you're flying dead straight from you and then going away from you, for 20 minutes, you won't be able to fly straight out because you need to come back as well. So the battery will calculate when to come back and then automatically tell the pilot, okay, this is the time for you to come back. And then it will automatically initiate. If you don't do that, then it will automatically initiate return to home function. And also some of the batteries are heated as well for all the countries. Then it has a function to automatically heat the battery. And the other thing is that now I told you that when you're charging an RC battery, you need to, if you're putting it away, you need to put it into a storage and then put it away because the lipos are very unstable. So these batteries, you don't need to worry about those kind of things. Normally, if the battery is charged and if you don't use it for some time, you can set it up on the particular drone itself, and then you can let the battery discharge itself automatically by putting on a setting that whenever you like to do. Right. So we'll go to the motor configuration and wiring of a drone. So now you have 4 motors. Now, normally, you know, when you put on the propeller in, you know, this is the rotation of the motor should be. But you have 4 propellers here. Now you need to know what's the orientation of the motors need to turn. So let me show you how it works. So this is a normal phantom drone. Although if you're building something like this, I mean, building a drone, it will be the same thing. Only thing you need to think about is the orientation of the rotation of the particular motor. So for example, this is the front of the aircraft. So always you need to think that 2 motors in the front rotates inwards. So basically this propeller rotates inwards. This propeller rotates inwards. Similarly at the back, this propeller rotates inwards. This rotates inwards. In the picture, it's more clear, I believe. And the other thing that you need to think of is that when you're building something like this, you need to think about the propellers. Propellers in the sense there can't be the same propeller in four motors. So one propeller will be counterclockwise. That is why we have put CW there. And the other propeller is counterclockwise and clockwise. So CCW is counterclockwise, CW is clockwise. So clockwise in the sense clock where the propeller is rotating according where the clock is rotating, and counterclockwise is the opposite way. So when you're buying propellers, you need to buy them as pairs. So one will be clockwise and the other one will be counterclockwise. And then that's how you install it onto your propeller. And the other thing is you need to know how a drone is controlled. So obviously on this picture, it says that if you have a motor which is turning on the other direction than the direction that you wanted to, I've told you this thing as well in that yesterday's session as well. All you need to do is there are 3 wires coming out of the motor. So you basically exchange any 2 of the wires, then it will turn opposite direction. So for example, to tell you more about how this is controlled, so now normally an aircraft has ailerons, elevators and rudder, right? But in this case, you don't have any moving surfaces on this, any control surfaces on this at all. So how this would work is basically if it were to go up and down, then the speeds of these 4 motors will be increased. And if you want to come down, then it's automatically decreased. And if you want to go forward, the backward motors will have a faster rotation, and this will be the normal rotation. So that means it's going to basically tilt like this and then go forward. And then if you want to go backwards, it's the same thing as this, and then it goes backwards as well. And then to sides, so these two goes in, and then these two will have a faster rotation than these two, and then eventually this will turn like this, and similarly to this side as well. And then you can see the yaw moment, like the rudder moments, that's going to be like these two will turn faster than these two, and then the other way around, these two will go faster than the other. So that's the basic movements of how it's going to work. Hassan, is there any other questions?
No, so we can continue.
Right. Okay, so this is a basic motor configuration wiring diagram for a drone. So as you can see, that those motor movements has to be done through a flight controller. So that has to be there. And optionally, you can have an FPV system, which is first-person view. That is sort of like having goggles and then a camera fitted onto your drone. Maybe you can have it onto a screen or maybe onto your goggles. Then you have the ESCs and then lights if you want to have and things like that. So you the batteries as well you need to consider here, and then you can have a hub to distribute the power around the drone however you would like to. So yeah, so that's all about the drones, how you want to build it. So Hassan, are we looking at questions today?
Yes, sir. So
a lot of content today because I just wanted to answer a lot of questions, I believe.
Yes, so as this remarks the end of the presentation, we've got a couple of questions moving into question and A. So yes, so I will be directing the questions that we got to Mr. Samira here. So the first question would be, sir, when we are making or experimenting on our new drone, should we also register it even if it is not finished, even it's on a building stage?
Nowadays, they are implementing something like that for people who actually build drones and manufacture drones. So if you can get yourself registered as a manufacturer, there is an option with civil aviation, you can do that. If you do that, then you'll be able to do your testing with the aid of the Civil Aviation Authority. However, if you are testing a drone, you need to let them know as well that you are testing this particular drone.
And we got another question as well. How to become a certified drone pilot in Sri Lanka, specifically as a student who is not associated with any aviation bodies?
Right. The thing is that this actually happened out of the blue because of the COVID situation. The government basically wanted some pilots to do some surveillance works and things like that. So because of that, civil aviation basically initiated this process. So what they basically did was they put an advert saying whoever wanted to be certified drone pilot apply. So there were around, I think around 130 or 140 applications, or maybe more, I can't remember. Then they have narrowed it down to about 80. And then out of 80, they did some test, a written test, and then a medical test and a competency test. And then they awarded 19 of these people as certified drone pilots. So being a certified drone pilot is basically what they wanted you to do is, if there are any humanitarian things that you would the government require, we are there to assist them. And then having been a certified drone pilot, it does not necessarily means that you don't need any permission to fly. As I mentioned before, you need to have permission to fly, but however, sometimes even quite recently as well, if there are something to do with, like, let's say a fire breaks out or maybe a flooding, things like that, if the Air Force needs our assistance, then they will contact us, and then they will ask us to come to wherever they want us to come, and then do the surveillance for them. So that's how it works. And quite recently we did some testing on drone jamming equipment as well for them, which was successful. And so wherever we can, we will assist Sri Lankan Air Force as well as the Civil Aviation Authority when it comes to drones.
Yes, and before moving on to the next question, a small announcement. As you can see on the chat, you would find a Google form link which would mark your attendance for today. So please make sure to mark your attendance. This is also shared on the Facebook platform and YouTube platform as well. The link would be open for a time frame of 20 minutes from now on, which would mark your attendance. So please do fill that. Also, the feedback form is also shared. Please, it would be much appreciated if you can give us a feedback on our today's session so we can correct ourselves and always give you the best. So then moving on to the next question. Instead of using batteries, can we make use of solar energy for flying the drones?
Well, as I mentioned, you might be able to use it on a fixed wing aircraft. However, you will have to have some sort of a charging unit on board, because at the end of the day, solar power is not as dense, or the capacity wise is not enough to power a multicopter. But if you were having a solar powered fixed wing aircraft, for example, you can have the solar panels on top of a fixed wing. You might be able to charge the internal batteries where you can gain more time to fly the aircraft. But there are no such technology as per yet that they have developed so that you can only fly with solar power. There were some testing going on, but not at mass production.
All right, sir. So there's another question. So what can you suggest from your experience to a beginner motor, such as a motor KV range, the brand of motors?
Right, I would. It actually depends on the size of the propeller that you're going to use. So I've mentioned about this on our previous workshops. So if you're basically, let's say you're using a bigger propeller, that means you're going to need a bit more lower KV motor. Lower KV motor in the sense you need to have a motor which can handle up to that sort of a propeller with that particular speeds that you require. As I mentioned, for drones, especially for quadcopters, you need to have a motor which can respond to your input instantly. Not even your inputs, especially the flight controller will try to keep the aircraft straight and level, because there might be other conditions applied onto the aircraft. There can be wind, things like that. So just to avoid those things, then the motor has to be very responsive. So if you're using a bigger prop, then you go with a lower KV motor.
All right, sir. We have another question as well. When selecting a transmitter, what are the things and factors that should need to be considered according to the current rules and regulations in Sri Lanka? It would be better if sir could answer that in Sinhala.
මෙහෙමයි දැන් තියෙන regulations වල හැටියට ගොඩක් වෙලාවට remote එකක් අපිට ලංකාවේ තියෙන එකක් ගන්න එක issue එකක් නැහැ. ඔයාගේ requirement එක මොකක්ද කියලා බලලා ඔයා remote එකක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වුණාට දැන් ඔයා වෙන රටකින් remote එකක් ලංකාවට ගේද්දි හදිස්සිය හරි අපේ customs එකෙන් නවත්තගෙන ඊට පස්සේ ඒකලන් එක තියාගන්න. ඒකලන් එක තියාගෙන කියනවා TRC එකෙන් permission ගන්න කියලා මේ remote එකට. Again, Telecommunication Regulation Commission එකේ. Telecommunication Regulation Commission එකේ තමයි ඒගොල්ලන් තමයි mandate කරන්නේ මොන frequencies අපිට use කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. දැන් අපි ගෙන්නපු remote එක දැන් මම කියන්නේ මේ ගෙන්න remote එකක් ගැන. නමුත් ලංකාවේ තියෙන එකක් ගැන නෙමෙයි. ගෙන්නපු remote එක ඒ Telecommunication Regulation Commission එකේ තියෙනවා නම් bands අපිට normal එකකට use කරන්න බැරි band එකක තියෙනවා නම් එහෙනම් අපිට ඒගොල්ලන් දෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒකට එක්ක කියනවා ස්පෙෂල් පර්මිෂන් ගන්න කියලා, එහෙමත් නැත්නම් කියනවා ඒක අපේ ලංකාවට පාවිච්චි කරන්න බෑ කියලා. ඒක ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා. නමුත් අපි දැන් ලංකාවේ පාවිච්චි කරන රිමෝට් එකක් පාවිච්චි කරන්න හිතනවා නම් ලංකාවේ available shops වල තියෙනවා ගොඩක් රිමෝට් controls ගන්න. ඉතින් ඔයා use කරන දැන් මම ඔයාලට කිව්වා දැන් aircraft එකක් අපි ගනිද්දි අපිට ඇත්තටම minimum channels ඕනේ 4යි. නමුත් අපි drone එකක් හදනවා නම් drone එකට channels 4කට වඩා වැඩි ඕනේ. ඉතින් ඒක හින්දා ඔයා ඒ දේවල් consider කරලා ඔයාලට කැමති එකක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් තියෙන ගොඩක්ම cheapest and most reliable මේ remote එකක් තමයි FlySky කියන්නේ. ඒක තමයි ඇත්තටම අඩුම තියෙන තවත් Turnkey වල තිබ්බා remote එකක්. ඒක මම දන්නේ ලංකාවේ වැඩි available ද කියලා. Dragon Link කියලා එකක් තිබ්බා. ඒක නම් දැන් නැහැ. නමුත් ඒකත් එච්චරම සාමාන්‍ය මට්ටමේ තියෙන හොඳ remote එකක්. තවත් ගොඩක්ම දැන් ලංකාව ගොඩක්ම පාවිච්චි වෙන්නේ ඇත්තටම Spectrum, Futaba and Hightech. ගොඩක් ඒ කියන්නේ මේ hobby එකේ ඉන්න කට්ටිය පාවිච්චි කරනවා. ගොඩක් ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයාට පුළුවන් නම් ඔය hobby එකේ ඉන්න කට්ටියකින් කතා කරලා දැන් අපේ වුණත් අපේ කාට හරි remote එකක් ඕන නම් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට එක්කෝ කාගේ හරි ඉල්ල ගන්නවා නැත්නම් අපිට ඒ කියන්නේ කට්ටියට කතා කරලා අපිට information ගන්න පුළුවන් මේ remote එක හොඳයිද මේ remote එක නරකයිද දැන් අපේ කට්ටිය ගාවක් තියෙනවා remote සෑහෙන ගොඩක් ගණන් ඒවත් තියෙනවා නමුත් මම කියන්නේ නැහැ හැම remote එකම ඒ කියන්නේ ගණන් වෙන එකත් හොඳ වෙනවා කියලා මොකද සමහර ඒවා තියෙනවා අපේ remotes fail වෙච්ච ඒවා දෙපාර තුන් පාර fail වෙච්ච ඒවා තියෙනවා ඒ කියන්නේ හොඳට fly කර තිබ්බ remote එක fail වෙලා ඊට පස්සේ aircraft එකත් lost වෙච්ච ඒවා තියෙනවා I think ඒ වගේ වෙලාවල් වලට සමහර වෙලාවට ඒ හොඳම ඒ සල්ලි ගොඩක් දීලා වියදම් කරලා ගත්ත එකට වඩා අර FlySky කියන එක ඊට හොඳට වැඩ කරන්න වෙලාවල් තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒකින්ද අපි පොඩ්ඩක් අර කට්ටියත් එක්ක කතා කරලා මේක ඔයාලට හොඳයි කියලා හිතන එක තමයි මම හිතන්නේ හොඳම දේ ඕගලන්ට ගන්න.
Yes, moving on. Regarding the building materials for a beginner drone, sir, like is purchasing a chassis compulsory or is it possible to build one with stainless steel or aluminium rods and tubes?
Aluminium වලින් ගොඩක් කට්ටිය හදනවා ගොඩක් වෙලාවට. ඕගලන්ට වෙලා තියෙන මෙහෙමයි. aluminium stainless steel වලින් හදනවට වඩා carbon fiber වලින් හදන එක weight එක අතින් ලොකු දෙයක්. නමුත් ඕගලන් අලුතෙන් හදනවා නම් ඒක ඕගලන්ට ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් ඇත්තටම දැන් ලංකාවේ ගොඩක් materials ගන්න හරි අමාරුයි. ඒ කියන්නේ frames එකක් ගෙන්නන්න ලංකාවේ ගෙන්නන්න අමාරු ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවානේ. ඉතින් ඒකින්ද ගොඩක් කට්ටිය කරන්නේ දැන් මම දන්න අපේ club එකේම මල්ල දෙතුන් දෙනෙක් ඉන්න ඒකලම් එයා එක්කෙනෙක් හදලා තියෙනවා fertilizer මේව කරන්න පුළුවන් මේ drone එකක්. ඉතින් ඒ drone එකේ හදලා තියෙන්නේ තනිකරම aluminium වලින් aluminium frame මේ tubing අරගෙන ඒ වලින් තමයි හදලා තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒවා හදන එක ප්‍රශ්නයක් නෑ. ඔයා හදලා ඊට පස්සේ ඒකට හරියන ඒ කියන්නේ weight එකට හරියන ඔයාට motor එකයි ඒ configuration එක කරගත්තට පස්සේ ඒක කිසිම ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. එකම issue එක තියෙන්නේ අර weight එක පොඩ්ඩක් වැඩි වෙයි අනිත් ඒවාට වඩා strength එක පොඩ්ඩක් අඩු වෙයි සමහර විට. ඉතින් ඒක ඔයා දන්න විදිහට ඔයාට ඒක හදා ගන්න පුළුවන්කමක් තියෙනවා නම් ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයාට ඒක improve කරන්න පුළුවන්කමක් තියෙනවා.
Moving on, sir. The participant says, I have a question regarding the correct way of finding and adjusting the CG of a drone, as well as any calculation websites or software that is recommended for that to use.
Right. Normally, when you consider a drone, then I'm thinking this person has mentioned on a quadcopter. So I mentioned a CG for an RC aircraft can be taken 1/3 of that from the leading edge of the wing. You can take. However, if it were a drone, obviously the drone is sort of symmetrical on all sides. In that case, normally the flight controller will manage the CG, so you don't have to worry that much about it. However, if the aircraft is sort of drifting, so let's say sideways, forward, backwards, and things like that, you can even correct it with your trim tabs on your remote. There is no such thing as CG, but relatively, when you have something, for example, let's say you put on a camera in the front, you would tend to put your battery in the back just to balance it out. But there are no such things as CG points. But if you put your fingers in the middle, like for example, now I have this Mavic, right? So for example, now if you take from this point to this point and this point to this point, where the lines crosses, that's where the middle of it is. So if you just keep it like that, you know that it's basically balanced. That's how we normally do for drones.
So moving on to another question, sir. Nagarayen බැහැරව drone යාන ක්‍රියා කිරීමට අවසර ගත යුතුද?
හොඳ ප්‍රශ්නයක්. නගරේ පිට පළාත්වල කියලා කිසිම වෙනසක් නැහැ. හැම rules and regulation එකම එකයි. වා fly කරනවා නම් drone එකක් අර mass categories ඒ කියන්නේ අර බර categories වලට යටත් තියෙන එහෙනම් ඔයාට ඒ permission එක ගන්නම වෙනවා. වෙලා තියෙන අපේ කට්ටිය ගොඩක් කරන්නේ මෙතන කවුරුත් බලන්න නැහැනේ මෙතන කවුරුත් කියන්න නැහැනේ කියලා drone එක fly කරනවා. එහෙම ගොඩක් කට්ටිය කරනවා. ඒක මම නෑ කියන්නේ නෑ. ඒක කරන්න බෑ. එහෙම කරන්න බෑ. මොකද කවුරු හරි දැක්කොත් කියන එක නෙමෙයි මෙතන ප්‍රශ්නේ. අපි හරියට අපේ rules and regulations දැනගෙන අපි fly කරනවාද කියන එකයි මෙතන තියෙන්නේ. මේ මොකක් හරි ප්‍රශ්නයක් වුණ වෙලාවට ඊට පස්සේ ඔයාගේ drone එක ඔයාට හම්බ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. මොකද දැනට civil aviation එකේ ගොඩක් drones තියෙනවා. permission නැතුව fly කරපු. ඔයගලන් විශ්වාස කරන එකක් නැහැ. ඒවා ගොඩක් ඒවා රාජසන්තක කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒවා අය දෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. ඉතින් it's bad. So normally for video transmission you use 5.8 and 2.44 control line. So those two connections, if it does not interdict with TRC's regulations, then you can use it. There are some transmitters, especially where you can modify, where you can have a bigger range, where you basically change the frequency band. So those kind of transmitters might not be, like for example, you're not allowed to use it. However, there are people who does get away with it, but if TRC comes in and finds out that you're using this band, then you're in trouble. However, if whatever the amount of channels that you have, you can use it. It's not an issue, but only issue comes in with the band that you're actually using your radio.
Moving on, what is the minimum age to legally fly a drone in Sri Lanka?
Well, normally our minimum age is 18. That has not been changed as per yet, but I believe now, as I mentioned, that they are looking into model aircraft flying as well. So they might sort of change that or revisit that scenario. However, just go on to civil aviation website and then go on to rules and regulations. You'll see all the details that you need. But normally, for you to be registered as a drone pilot, you need to be at least 18.
There's another question, and it says, how does the return home function work? What if there were obstacles during the pathway? Would the drone return on a straight same line?
A good question. Now, it depends on the drone itself. So, for example, if you're building a drone which does not have return home function, then you need to be aware. If something goes wrong, obviously the drone will drop wherever it is. But nowadays, you have a lot of drones. For example, this one has return to home function, and it has sensors as well all around the aircraft. And there are some drones which does not have that particular function, like obstacle avoidance functions all around the aircraft. So normally how a return to home works is, so let's say you're flying the aircraft and there are some signal interferences, and then all of a sudden you lose all the signals to this particular aircraft. So you don't know where it is, you can't see it as well. You were basically relying on your screen. However, you are supposed to fly with somebody spotting the drone, and you're supposed to fly at the line of sight. So basically you need to fly where you can only see the drone. So let's say you can't even see the drone. So now you cannot control it. So what happens is, because you lost the connection from the drone to the transmitter. So what happens is, it will wait for about 10 seconds, and then automatically it will initiate a return to home function. So in this particular drone, I can set it up the altitude that it wants to go to. So normally, let's say if I lose the signals at around, let's say 100 meters, I have set it up to about 150 meters of the altitude to return to home the function. So what happens is, basically when it loses signal, and after 10 seconds it will automatically initiate return home, and it will fly up to 150 meters, and then it will start coming back to home where it was taken off from. Like normally when you take off, it will automatically get registered as a GPS coordinate where it actually took off from. So likewise, it will come back to that position, and along the way you will find some obstacles. So that's where all this obstacle avoidance comes into play. So if you have an obstacle avoidance systems on your aircraft, for example, even if you have it in the front, if you have an obstacle, it will stop. and then it will basically move around that obstacle and then initiate the return to home anyway. But however, if you don't have an obstacle avoidance, if you do have return to home function, then it will come straight to where you are. But if there is an obstacle, then obviously you are in a risk of hitting that particular obstacle, because this drone does not have any way of knowing there is an obstacle. So that's how return to home function works. So nowadays, almost all of the drones which gets manufactured has this obstacle avoidance function, and that you are able to return to home, or maybe even like when you're flying, there might be obstacles that you cannot avoid, and then it will avoid itself and then stop and then make a way around and then come back to where you were.
Great. So there's another question as, if someone makes a drone without a camera, which doesn't count as a drone, will they still need to get permission for it to fly?
The thing is, it's a good question, because because normally when you want to build a drone, you need to have a flight controller for it. So if with that particular flight controller, you put on a GPS device onto that is also considered as a data acquisition system. But if you don't have a GPS and you have only a flight controller, that does not specify as a drone. It's basically a flying machine. It can be an RC flying machine. It's just having 4 propellers on it, and then that's it. Only thing is, as I mentioned, if it comes to a drone category, if it has a data acquisition system. But however, with civil aviation, if that particular vehicle is more than 200 grams in weight, then obviously you'll have to get permission, whether it's a drone or whether it's a aircraft.
Are tilt rotors still considered as model planes or drones legally?
Tilt motors.
Like those Osprey models.
So those are basically scale models. But however, as I said, like if you have, now this is the misconception that people have. So the aircrafts or the drones or the quadcopters, let's call it a quadcopter. Okay, so quadcopter, which does not have a data acquisition system on board, is just an aerial vehicle. It's not a drone. Drone is where you have a data acquisition system. Now, in this particular example, he's basically mentioning because it has rotors and it can take off vertically, whether it comes under a drone or a normal aircraft. It is actually a normal aircraft.
Thank you, sir. And there's another question. What is an uncontrolled airdrome?
Uncontrolled airdrome.
Yeah, aerodrome. Sorry, my bad.
Oh,
what is an uncontrolled aerodrome?
Aerodromes are basically airports. So uncontrolled in the sense there are no air traffic controllers or ground controllers on that particular area, but you can use it as an airport. That is what an uncontrolled aerodrome is. Aerodromes are basically airports. So in this particular example, there will be a runway where you can come in and land, but you don't need to get clearance to land your particular aircraft because maybe it's like very less dense, or there might be no traffic at all, so there won't be any people controlling that particular aerodrome or the airspace. So that's why it's called uncontrolled.
So there's a question regarding a picture that you showed in your slides. So what is the purpose of the V-shaped tail in the drone that was shown in the first slide? Is it for drag?
No, not necessarily. That's a sort of a V-tail aircraft. So similar thing, basically it's the empennage of that particular aircraft. So you have the elevator as well as you have the rudder controls as well onto that, which is, even though the configuration is like that, but you have moving surfaces. So it's not, you can use it as sort of like an air brake as well, but mainly that's basically your tail or the empennage of that particular aircraft. That's nothing new.
So as a participant wants to know about the career opportunities related to IoT and aviation. He says that he is an electronic and a communication graduate and is really interested about those sectors.
Right. Career-wise, well, it's basically if you are now in Sri Lanka, obviously there are a lot of opportunities in agricultural areas and drone mapping. So drone mapping obviously is done through either through companies or individually. Now there are a lot of individual companies who actually get people to sort of what they do is basically outsource the job that they get, and then they will give it to somebody who has a drone and who's capable of doing such things. So likewise, you be able to earn some money out of it. I don't want to talk about how much you can earn, but it's considerably good amount, especially when it comes to drone mapping. Because at the end of the day, if you can, if this person is doing IT, right? Is it?
Yes, sir. He's a telecommunication and electronics graduate.
Okay. So if that person is particularly good in sort of software side, then even he can develop a software that he can
Recording in progress.
Okay, sir. So now this would mark as the last question for the event. What are the job opportunities in Sri Lanka for aeronautical engineering undergraduates? And do you have any idea about how to get the AML license, which is issued by EASA?
Sure. AML license, let me talk about it first. So Sri Lankan Aviation College does provide you with the courses, B1 and B2 courses. However, because there are lack of job opportunities for aeronautical engineers, Sri Lankan Aviation College has stopped recruiting local students. So only foreign students are available to do these B1 and B2 courses from, I believe, last year. But the things might change in the near future because the COVID actually had a major impact, and there are some students who have already been graduated has not got a job. So the things are not looking that good in aviation at the moment. However, things always bounce back. So aeronautical engineers, obviously, we don't have many companies in this country. So if you are thinking about being an engineer either for Sri Lankan Airlines or maybe even other companies, try to get into a graduate training program. By doing so, you'll be able to gain more knowledge and experience as well. Because I've started as graduate trainer at Sri Lankan Airlines for about a year. I was there. However, the job opportunities are very limited. But as long as you have some experience, I think it's a good opportunity. Now, if you are going to do a degree in aeronautical engineering and then also considering about getting the AML as well, I would suggest you do that because it's an added advantage. The degree comes in later on, but just to get a job as an aircraft maintenance technician, AML comes into play. So if you were to do that, then it's a good thing. But don't think that whatever you learn is going to go for waste. But you can always find some other avenues. That's the reason why I was talking about these other avenues, such as using drones for other incomes. So you can always think of these things as well.
So great. So that remarks the end of the question and answer session for today's event. And I believe that today's event was very, very, very insightful. And I personally believe that I've learned a lot from these 2-day sessions. And also, once again, I need to say this. a feedback form is given to you through the chat here, and it is also shared in all the other platforms, Facebook and YouTube. So please do fill the feedback form. It is anonymous. It's 100% anonymous, so we won't know who gave the feedback. So give your genuine feedback and we will correct ourselves on the upcoming events. And also there's something small interesting for people who are interested in augmented reality and VR. This is your passion. And you know, this is for the people who are really passionate about VR and augmented reality. So here goes, presenting Illusio, organized by the IEEE Students Branch of SLTC, chapter of IAS. So that was Illusio. For more information, you can visit our IEEE Students Branch of SLTC Facebook page, and the registration link is also given there. Currently, the registrations are open. So before winding up the session, I would humbly request everyone to turn on their cameras if possible to capture this moment and make this a memory. So after a couple of minutes, our technical team would be capturing a screenshot of the memory that we are making here. I guess I will wait a couple of seconds more. I guess it's fine right now. So on a count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes. There's another screenshot as well. On the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I guess it's okay now. Yes, so thank you very much. So Mr. Samira has been with us here for 2 days now, and he's been sharing all these informations, which are really cool and really awesome. So much insightful for everyone. So now I guess it's time to thank each and everyone who is present here with us, spending their valuable time. So now I call upon Mr. Nadila Senanayake to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Hassan. So it was an amazing session. However, dear, hope you are all safe and with your loved ones during these troubling times. As the chapter secretary of SEDS SLTC, I had the great honor in thanking Mr. Samira Wickramarachchi, Vice President of the Formy Flyers RC Flying Club, for his valuable time and generous participation in this event. Thank you, sir. And I believe that I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here that when I say we had an informative and engaging, and to be honest, quite a fun session. So thank you so much. And speaking of these sessions, this series was no solitary effort. The IEEE student branch of SLTC and the SEDS chapter of SLTC worked hand in hand in collaboration to make Aerotech a realized dream. In that essence, we'd like to thank Mrs. Varonika Hippola, who is the branch academic advisor of IEEE of SLTC, and Dr. Lasit Yasaketu, branch senior academic treasurer of IEEE, as well as Dr. Nanda Gunawardana, who is the senior advisor to SEDS SLTC. These sirs and ma'am, you guys gave us the support to make this project a reality, and for that we thank you. And the committee, can't forget the team. Our project heads, Dimanta Senanayaka and Ushan Sakunta. I can go on for more than half an hour listing names and teams and what we did. But excuse me guys, I cannot take that much time. So for the team, thank you guys. We accomplished our target. And last, but the most importantly, all of you who gave us your valuable time and attention and participate in Aerotech. It is our sincere hope that you gain the knowledge that you were looking for when you signed up for Aerotech. Having said that, this event is not a one-time thing. As Hassan showed just a minute or two earlier, we have other events. We have a journey to go, and it is our hope that you would honor us by joining with us on that journey of knowledge and enlightenment. So thank you guys for participating, and well, I'd like to give the control back over to Hassan, and yeah, stay safe and have a good night.
Thank you, Nadila, and I'm appreciating all your presence here. Thank you so much, Mr. Samira, for being with us on a 2-day session here. And I would like to, sorry, sir?
All of your team, and job well done. If you have any feedback, do let me know. I'll try to improve upon myself as well. So yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. On behalf of Formiflies as well, I would like to thank you on this.
Our pleasure, sir, our pleasure. So I hope everyone is staying safe, and as it's the end of our today's event, I hope it's time to wrap this up. And please stay safe, guys, and stay tuned with IEEE and SEDS from SLTC. We will be bringing you much more insightful sessions as such in near future. Thank you, guys, and have a good night.
Recording stopped.
much of projects to be done on physical. So the only barrier that we have currently is the pandemic.